So here we go. Where's my live chat box? Hi, Ed. Alright, so let me get myself arranged. It's never quite plug and play like you would think. I'm going to drag this over here so I'm facing you guys. And full screen it. See, that works. It always puts the chat box too low. Don't show these tips again. Oh, there, perfect. I have the chat box where I want it. Let's see. I feel like some of the words. Hello, Brazil. Hello, Austria. Hello, Houston. All right, guys. So today's topic, I've been dwelling on it for the last few days, and I've been trying to decide what do I want to talk about. And I'd mentioned last week that I was going to talk about food, but then I was like, oh, food. I'd rather talk about something I'm passionate about, and that would be about the Perfect Reef tank. And Perfect Reef tanks are not that easy to come by, and they are a huge goal. But before I go any further, I have a couple things I have to tell you. The contest is still going right now. So in about 10 minutes or so, maybe 15, I'm going to draw the names. So if you have not entered the contest to win a trip to Macna, not in San Diego, it's going to be in New Orleans, then enter now. All you have to do is type, I want to go to Macna, and then I've got this random generator thing set up over here that I hope will work. And I'd love to show you it working, but I haven't figured out that part yet. So I'll take a screenshot, you'll just trust me, and we'll draw a winner. But, okay, that was the first thing. The second thing, I'm hoping my microphone sounds better this week. Last weekend, it just sounded really tinny, and something wasn't set up right, so I apologize for that, and I hope it's better this time. Believe it or not, even though I have all the gear here, I couldn't verify how it sounds, so I'm hoping this will be better, because it's the system I like to use normally, and last week I kind of forgot. Alright, let me put my notes over here so I've got them in front of me. Don't need the keyboard because I am talking to you guys. Hello, Israel! Hello, Germany! Hello, New York! Boy, everybody is on. Sounds a little pithy. Is that good or bad? I can try to lower the volume a little bit here. Maybe that'll clean it up a fraction. Pitchy. Alright, well, that could be my voice. It was just last time. I didn't like it. Alright, normally so I've got this little connector that you can almost see here. And when I use this guy, it cleans up the sound. But when I don't use it, it sounds bad. Alright, I can tell I already need a drink. So I'm going to show you guys what I'm drinking here in just a second. Got my koozie here from Rod's Food. Inside is a version of Angry Orchard. It's called Wicked Grove, and it's delicious. It's an apple cider. But I needed a better drink holder than a bottle, so I got my mug. Alright. Let's get into it. What constitutes a perfect reef? When I look at other people's reef tanks, different thoughts go through my mind. And I'm going to be a little judgmental today. I'm also going to be very supportive today because I'm not a critical person, but I'm picky. Does that make sense? So when I look at a reef tank, I want to see specific things. I want to see gorgeous, healthy corals. I want to see color. I want to see active fish. I really enjoy that. But, you know, I'm not a person that stays to only it's got to be an SPS reef. So let me show you a couple of pictures. I preloaded a few slides for today. Let's go way back. So this slide that's about to appear on your side shows my 29-gallon that I ran for a few years, and I ended that tank in 2002. And that little tank was my pride and joy back then. I loved it. And it wasn't a complicated tank, even though I added a lot of gear to make it more complicated. But it was a tank that was doing very well. Remember, 29 gallons, closed loop, and I was using live rock, of course. I built a hang-on back overflow box that drew the water down to my sump. That was the first sump I'd ever built. And I added a did I say that? I added a closed loop to create flow in the tank so I had less power heads to look at. I also scraped the back clean. You can see the back is, well, I hope you can see, the back is nice and clean and scraped because I just feel that corals stand out better against a clear background versus a lot of coralline growing on the back or any other kind of algae. Below it was my angle tank, and everyone loved the angle tank. I've got another picture of it right here for you. The angle tank was when you first walked into my door. So as soon as you came in, you would see the clownfish and the anemones immediately. I added acans, I added hammer coral, I had some zinnia in there. I just enjoyed putting some fun corals in there just for a little bit of life when you're walking in the door. And I was very excited to set this up, but the problem, if you could call it one, was I had to run the plumbing through a closet into the fish room that was under the 280 gallon. And the reason I say problem is because, and then there was also the challenge of getting my hands into the top of that tank. I don't have it. Let me add another slide here. Let's see if I can do this while I'm on here with you guys. Add a slide, add a picture, and I'm going to add this one here. Okay, so here's a side view of that tank. And I hope it's loading. It's literally loading as I load. That's funny. All right, so you'll see it in a few seconds. So this tank, I made it out of acrylic, and I made the top a narrow opening to reach in, to place corals, but it was kind of hard to clean. The front pane wasn't hard to scrape clean. I had a cleaning magnet that I'd work over it, and the light shot straight down. That was a metal halide fixture. But it was a pretty reef tank that I enjoyed to run, and people would always come over and I want to see the angle tank. That's been replaced. When I had to set up the 400-gallon reef, that closet had to go, the plumbing through the walls had to go, and I ended up just returning to, the basics. A big tank, and then a secondary tank, which is an anemone cube that you guys love. I am looking for comments on the side, so I'm trying to pay attention. I'm sorry to hear that your corals are dying, Cantu. Hopefully we can maybe get you back on track or get you motivated so that you can pick up what's going on. So here is the reef I like to look at, and it's it's an SPS reef, and this type of coral reef I think is pretty much the pinnacle of what we want, or at least what I want. Others might say, no, I love things that move. I love to have a simple tank that doesn't take a lot of maintenance. This is a reef tank that belongs to my buddy Dwayne. He's in at Seattle, Washington, and that guy has a reef thumb. He can grow corals, and he does such a beautiful job of it. And this is just one example. I didn't want to pull up a ton of different tanks. I just wanted to show you one that I'm especially close to, and whenever he posts pictures, I'm always excited. Dwayne's reef is plumbed through the wall, and it goes into an exterior shed outside of his home that has all the equipment and the sump and frag tanks and calcium reactor and all the goodies that you need. But right behind that tank, you can't quite make it out, maybe you can, but there's actually a black fabric curtain that he pulled across so you can't see what's behind it, because what's behind it is a washer and a dryer. So you'd never know, right? It's awesome. And he sits in his den, he watches TV, or his wife plays video games, and the reef tank is right there in wall, and he can appreciate it. But all the sound, all the noises, they're not there because they're in that shed outside, and it just plumbs through the wall. It's pretty impressive. Now, for me, here's an example of... Do I want to jump ahead? No, I'm not going to jump ahead. I'm going to talk about this. So, on the left side is my 280-gallon reef that I ran for 6 years. It started leaking just shy of 6 years. And on the right is the 400-gallon that you guys have come to know over the last few years. And to be really honest, I loved my 280-gallon reef. I felt like it was the perfect reef. I have never been able to mimic it. It was my best work. Here's a close-up of some of the corals in that tank. And I don't know what I did differently. I mean, I used Vortec pumps, I had a huge skimmer, I had a sump. Maybe I just pruned the SPS more often. I don't like getting my hands in the tank. I prefer to just let it grow. And as you can see, there's that one tabling coral just to the left of the hammer coral. Okay, so let me kind of get you guys on footprint. You see the blue chromis, those little blue fish. To the right of them to the right of them is a acropora, and then to the right of that are these tabling corals, and you'll see 4 different shelves. That's acropora plana. And it would grow out, and then it would create like a new layer, and I kept stacking them on top of each other to create that stair step. And I thought that was pretty awesome. And then, of course, to the far right, just barely in the image, you can see another acro up high that is almost up to the surface of the water. And that was attached to a frag plug on the overflow box, and it grew from a tiny little twig into a little colony that was an L shape that actually hugged the tank. And it was my favorite reef. I mean, it did so well, and when it leaked, it broke my heart. And the leak was in the top left corner, and there was no real way for me to solve it. I just went ahead and broke it down. I had some buddies come over, and we took all the corals out, and then began the planning of the 400-gallon system. It was a bummer. Man, I really have something in my throat today. Okay. So, here's what I look for in a perfect reef. And I say this as a person that used to pick the Tank of the Month tanks. I was part of, the editorial staff for Reef Central, and at that time, we would choose who was worthy. And ironically, my tank was never featured on any website as a Tank of the Month. And I don't know, I'm not saying that so that someone will do it now. I'm saying it as it's kind of interesting that all these years, people know me, they know my reefs, but it's never actually been featured anywhere. The 29-gallon I showed you guys 10 minutes ago was actually nominated right when I had my appendix burst. I didn't know anything about it. I walked into one of these Care Now places and said, I need a pill, I'm not feeling right. And they said, go straight to the ER. And so I ended up having to have this emergency surgery. I was supposed to die. I didn't die, but my tank declined. And so when I finally had recovered 6 or 8 weeks later, my tank didn't look anything that I considered Tank of the Month, and I declined the honor. And then my 280 was doing great, and every month we'd have to pick a Tank of the Month, and the guys would always say, Mark, let's use your tank. And I kept saying, save it on the back burner, because if we ever have someone drop out, we can drop mine in, and that would be awesome. And we never used it. So anyway, it was my beautiful tank in my house. People saw it online on the forums, and even to this day, I do post on Reef to Reef. If you're not on that forum, that's a great place to go to get some education about the hobby. And I have a build thread over there that I post to occasionally. I'm pretty much more on social media than forums these days. I just have been. It's just, I don't know, maybe it's easier for me. I don't really know. I'd have to make an effort to go to a forum these days. So, we talked about the 400. I felt like I had one more slide for you. Maybe not. Now, I mentioned before scraping the back glass of the tank. If you want to have Tank of the Month, that quality of a tank, the one that everyone's like, oh my god, that is an awesome system, you're going to do more maintenance than you're probably doing right now. And it really comes down to husbandry, how you take care of your tank. And if you like to be hands-off and you just want to leave it alone and you do the occasional water change and you do some water tests and you throw food in and you clean the skimmer, then it'll just be your tank. But if you are always keeping it clean, if you are staying on top of your water quality, if your corals are growing, they're healthy, they're vivid, that kind of thing will make a big difference in how your tank will be perceived by others. I mean, look at Dwayne's tank. Let's go back to his real quick. Now, let me tell you something about Dwayne's tank. He set it up years ago, and then he said, I'm going to have to go in there and I have to cut it. I have to go in there and really trim and remove things that I don't like. And he set it up, and I thought he was crazy to touch it because his tank was gorgeous. And then I believe this picture is about 6 months after he did the reset. And it looks years old. It looks fantastic. And it's scraped clean. You don't see coralline anywhere. He keeps everything really pristine. That's the number one rule for me about a reef tank. The second rule I have for a reef tank that's to be that quality to me, no frag racks in the tank. I hate looking at frag racks in a tank. And I went to visit a guy in California who had a beautiful reef tank. And he's like, Mark, what do you think? Tank of the Month? And I looked him right in the eye. I said, get rid of the frag racks. And he said, are you kidding me? I said, no. You need to remove that. That's an eyesore. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look natural. It doesn't look like a reef. Where do you go to a reef in the ocean and there's a frag rack? And that's just me. Others might say, nope, I'm totally fine with it, but I don't like the look of it. I think a frag rack is a temporary thing that you have in your tank to hold some frags you're about to sell. It's not a place where you put frags that grow and grow and grow onto the rack and stretch across, and you have to cut the plug off, and there's still tissue everywhere. Or there's zoanthids all in it. Or there is like pavona or cephastria. You'll have a cephastria that really grows into all the squares. The whole thing is a grid of Montipora or cephastria, which is meteor shower is a nickname that gets used. But corals should never be on a frag rack that long to where they become attached to it. And it happens, you ignore it, or you're focused on other things, or you're working, or whatever, and this thing just kind of becomes its own little shelf of life. But until it's completely encrusted to where you can't tell it's a frag rack anymore, it's a frag rack, and I can't stand it. So no frag racks in a reef tank if you want it to be stellar. And if you're thinking, well, I want to post a really pretty picture of my tank, and I think it's great, take the frag rack out, stick it in the sump, take your picture, and then put it back, so that none of us knew. I remember in the years ago, I used to take people's pictures they'd post online. And they would say, how can I make my tank look better? And I would take their photograph and I'd shove it in Photoshop, and I would delete the heater, I'd delete the power heads, I would just, and I'd make the background black, and then I'd repost it on their thread, and they'd say, how did you do this? I got rid of all that crap that's in your tank. Because the tank should be about the corals and the livestock and about the fish, the invertebrates, all the exciting things that are milling about. And when stuff gets really dirty in your tank, when the substrate is all covered in some kind of a diatom or cyano, jump in there and handle it. When the glass is dirty, scrape it clean. I use a cleaning magnet about 3 times a week. And it probably would be less if I fed less, but I feed a lot. I love to feed my fish. My fish love me because I feed them a lot. But use a cleaning magnet regularly to get the bulk of the algae off and to prevent coralline from kicking in. And then the other thing that I would recommend is that you also use a razor blade from time to time. Now, I don't have a picture of the razor blade I'm going to describe to you, so you're just going to have to listen. I went to a beauty salon where they sell every kind of supply that any kind of haircut place would sell. And they have these razor blades that, no, I'm just showing you the pictures of my tanks here because you can see they're clean. I'm always keeping the glass clean. All right, back to me. These razor blades that they sell at the beauty salon are about this long, and the tip is rounded, so it doesn't have corners. And it's meant to fit inside some shears, so when they're cutting your hair, it's kind of like cutting and razoring at the same time. I don't know what the purpose of that type of a haircut is, but I do know that's the blade you like. And you can buy, I think it's a 5 or a 10 pack, and it's $2-3 bucks. And the nice thing about those razor blades, they're single edged, so you can hold onto a piece of metal, and you can scrape your tank, but because there's no sharp points, because it's rounded, you're less likely to scratch the glass of your tank. If your tank is acrylic, don't use any kind of metal. Just don't. I'd much rather you use a piece of, use a credit card, use a hotel key card. In the old days, we were getting fake credit cards in the mail, you apply now. Those are pretty rigid. They're getting cheaper and thinner and kind of worthless. Another thing you can scrape acrylic with is another piece of acrylic. If you get a nice, rigid piece of 1/4-inch acrylic and you can make it the size of a credit card, you can scrape your tank with that. There's a few different tools on the market now. I feel like one name in my head is Easy Flip. Something you guys might know. If someone knows, tell me in the comments so I can say it correctly. But that one has like a hard blade that's plastic that you can scrape the tank with if it's made of acrylic, and you avoid the scratches. A big important thing about people with glass tanks, especially if you have a Starfire tank, which is the low iron glass, is not to let sand get in between the cleaning magnets, so when you're cleaning the glass, you don't end up scratching it. Just called the flipper. Okay, thank you, Roy. I could have sworn it was called something else. That's fine. If you're cleaning your glass, I try to clean above the sand line, and then the last of it, I'll go down there and I will clean it with a credit card, or the razor blade I was describing. Also, another trick I do to make the front of the sand look nice. Thank you, Robin. He says Tunzi also has a plastic knife that will work. Another thing that I do along the front of my tank and along the side, the perimeters where you see the sand, because here's your glass and then here's your sand bed. It's this thick, or this thick, or this thick, and there's like this garbage growing inside there. You can take a spatula and you can run the spatula inside and just kind of work your way along that edge. That will not hurt your sand bed. It will not release horrible things into your tank, and it'll make the front sand look nice and white again. It'll actually kind of, it does this neat thing where the light goes through and through and through like in layers or stratas, and it's kind of nice, but it gives you that clean look again. Keep everything in your tank clean. So I mentioned scraping the back, keeping the walls clean, doing all those edges with a razor blade, get into those corners. And then the other thing, I would say clean the overflow, clean the returns, clean the pumps, and limit how much gear is actually in the display tank itself. Because the more stuff in your tank, the more of a distraction it is. And I'd much rather everything be in the sump. Even the all-in-one tanks, think about those. All the gear is behind a wall, so you don't have to see it. But invariably, we start adding things into the tank. We put a power head here, a power head there. We find the heater doesn't fit the back, so we put it inside, but it's visible, or you hide it behind a rock, but there's a cord coming up. Anything you can do to mask the man-made stuff so your tank looks natural is ideal. Okay. I think we should stop now and choose a winner, because I promised I'd do it during the stream, and I feel like I went longer than I said. So, first of all, I'm going to try and see if this random comment generator is going to work. It wouldn't work for me earlier. It was being a pain. It's almost like I broke it because I was testing it, and now it doesn't want to cooperate. All right, that one's not going to work. Try the next one. Load in the comments. There was 172 comments, and it says randomly pick winner. Perfect! It picked one that said, I want to go to Macna. That's all you had to do. So I'm going to take a screenshot really quick, and I'm going to drop it into here so you guys can see it. And the winner, I should say, the winner is Rich Winkler. So congratulations, Rich. Let me add a slide here really quick somehow. The software is not as friendly as I'd like it to be. Actually, I'm going to delete this one, I think, so I can add one. Why is it being so picky? Okay. Adding a slide. We will do this one here. I've got to pick the right slide. That didn't work. One more time. How about this one? That'll work. So, we'll add the slide desktop. The winner. I'll add me really quick. So you guys see how this all works. So, Rich, congratulations on winning this contest. And I hope that to see you at Macna, of course. I will also comment on your name on the thread, under the video, so that way you'll get a notification, and I'll try to direct message you as well. And that's it. You're going. You're going to get a chance to hang out with a lot of cool people, learn a lot. I'm very curious to see your tank and see what you think about Macna. So be sure you seek me out at the show. Congratulations. All right. I'm going to leave this up for a couple more minutes, and then we'll switch it to another slide. Let's see. All right, you know what? I have done my entire list of what I was going to talk about, and we are 27 minutes in. So I'd love to answer some questions you have about the Perfect Reef. I'd love to stay on this topic, so if possible. So feel free to start using that chat box, and let's see what we can find out here. Hey, Rich, you're here. Great. I don't have to notify you. That's awesome. I'm so glad you tuned in and you actually got to see yourself being picked live. So someday I'll figure out how to use a software to where you can see my screen and actually see something happen. But in this case, I just had to screenshot it. So, what do you guys think is the perfect reef? What, do you disagree with what I said? Do you agree? Do you prefer something entirely different? And then after I answer some of your questions, then I'll turn around and I'll talk about my reef, because that's another topic I want to get into. How does flow affect SPS coral growth rates? Ricky asked that question. The SPS corals are different structures. And so if you have a coral that's very dense, it just kind of looks like I'm talking about SPS corals, okay? But it kind of looks like a brain, like the Acropora humilis. That is a very thick coral. And water can pound that coral, and that coral can totally handle it. And then there's some that are very thin, like little strands of, I mean, like the thickness of a spaghetti noodle before it's been cooked, okay? Those are called anacropora. And that type of coral can't handle the flow because it's so brittle. And if you hit it with the same flow that the humilis was taking, you'd shatter it, or you would just kill it. Yeah, you just can't handle it. So the importance of flow is matching the flow to the corals you're keeping in your tank. I love Acropora, and you saw Dwayne's. I'm going to go back to Dwayne's picture because it's my favorite. Well, actually, we'll go to mine. So in my tank, I had a mixture. I had anemones. I had LPS, like that big hammer coral. I had the, of course, the Acroporas in there. And I had these big frilly mushrooms. And all of these different things had to live together in the same water, which isn't really normal in nature. In nature, if you've watched anything, like Chasing Corals or anything on National Geographic, all these different videos that we see of natural corals under I can't even say the word, in the ocean underneath the surface of the water, it's species specific. There's a few of this species. There's not this conglomeration of so many corals in a fixed footprint. And it's not even natural. I mean, we do our best to make it look as natural as possible, but we're putting guys together that never live together normally. I've seen clams in rock, where just it's open enough and the mantle is appearing, but it's solid rock, and there's a clam in a hole, and we would never do that. We want our clams to be visible. We want them to be on the sand bed, or we want them on a rock, and we love what they look like, but to see how a reef has completely grown around it and trapped it, and it just barely be wide enough to open and breathe and eat and live, and it closes for protection, but it's just a sliver. It's crazy. And yet, that's natural. Seeing a bunch of algae around reefs is actually natural, and the fish feed on it all day long. We don't want any algae in our tanks. So, I mean, there's some comparisons right there. But when it comes to the SPS corals, like you were saying, if you have too much flow, you will harm the tissue on the skin unless the coral gets used to it. If you, like I mentioned in the last video, if you can dial it up, like you have a pump that's DC powered and it's variable speed, and you could start everything around 30% and then 40% and then 50%, or maybe even 5% increases every week, you could build up the amount of flow happening and the coral can adapt to it. You just can't just go, I'm going maximum speed, like I'm not going to turn on my TV at maximum volume, because it would, it just hurts your ears after a while. And in the case of corals, they need to be clean, so we want enough flow to keep them clean and to bring food to them. All right, let me answer another question. What do I think about bristleworms? Eddie, I have no issue with bristleworms whatsoever, and I read a lot of threads where people blame bristleworms for everything, and they're not evil. They're detrivores. They're eating whatever is decaying or dying or dead on the sand bed or in the rockwork. And, of course, they're opportunistic. I've watched bristleworms go up and eat I drop in pellet food, and the pellet is sitting on the sand, and I watch the worm kind of go over it. And it's funny because the mouth is about, if the worm was like this long, the mouth is about here, and so you'll see the tip kind of roll up, and then his mouth opens up, and he eats the pellet, and you can kind of see it go down its throat. Or does it have a throat? I don't know. It's a worm. But it works its way into the digestive system. And bristleworms are oftentimes blamed for, oh, my fish died and the bristleworms killed it, or my clam was devoured by bristleworms, because we see the dead animal and we see the bristleworms and we automatically assume, well, they murdered it. But that's not the case. Bristleworms are a cleanup crew and they're normal. So what we want to do is we want to allow them to live, to exist, until they get too big. And so if you find one that's like 2 feet long, or the ones that are this thick around that are obviously 14 feet and don't belong in your tank, those have to go. And that's not a bristleworm, by the way. At that point, you've gone into, I'm going to say the name wrong, so I'm not even going to bother. Eucynid, I'm saying it wrong, but it starts with EU. EUC, if you want to start Googling that. And these things are voracious, and they will eat corals or whatever they can get their jaws on. Okay, let me see. How long did it take... Nepa Reefer says, how long did it take... Can I read this? How long... Oh, there must be some words missing. to get to the point you thought your tank was a perfect reef. My 280, loved my 280, and it was full. The reef, I mean, I grew a toadstool leather from the size of a pinky to the size of a 33-gallon trash can. It was massive. It filled the entire side of my reef. It took about a third of the tank. And you can see it on the right side of that left picture. That's a giant toadstool leather. And it was my pride and joy, but it, of course, exuded a lot of crap into the water, so I had to always run fresh carbon on the tank. Carbon takes out the toxins from the chemical warfare that's happening between different corals that normally wouldn't live together. So it's a good way to keep your water clear and to keep the toxicity down in the tank. The tank you're looking at there on the left, that was around the 5-year mark. I'd say around the 3-year mark I was in love with it. Oh, and that brings up something I want to mention to you guys. Oh, I can't give you a live shot. I had to just suggested that. I can only, I can't turn this laptop, so sorry. But I did post a picture of the 400-gallon that's on the right side of the screen, and that one has been running now for almost 3 years. And you know what? Everyone loves this tank, so let me just get into that, because that's what I wanted to talk about anyway. Okay, so my reef is fine. I don't love it. I see lots of reefs I think are way prettier, and when people come over like, oh my god, I love your reef, I'm just like, why? And I had one person come over last year, and he said, Mark, that is the biggest acropore I've ever seen in my life. I cannot believe how large that is. And he's talking about that big staghorn in the dead center of the 400-gallon reef, which is the picture on the right with the metal halides on top. And that coral is probably about 2 feet by 3 feet. It's a big colony that has been growing constantly since I stuck it in this tank. And it has dominated the tank. It's called a shadow caster because it creates a giant shadow and everything underneath it struggles for light, and they're not doing well. And I have to go in and cut it. And I don't want to cut it, but I have to cut it. The area underneath it is all dead. So every time I look at my tank, I see this big, dark, dead area, and that bugs me. I have a big bird's nest on the left side of the tank that, you see the pretty part, but there's this huge cluster of dead underneath behind that's in total shade, gets no light, and isn't alive, and it's just taking up space. And so I have to do what my buddy Dwayne did with his tank. I have to rip everything out and reset. And I don't want to, but I have to. And the reason I don't want to is I love to let corals grow naturally. And that's why I'm not constantly pruning, which is what I was saying Dwayne is really good at. He gets in there and he keeps it tidy and he helps keep the shapes. I've got another friend named Robert. He runs a fish store up in North Richland Hills. And he grew a beautiful reef tank in his home. Everyone wanted to see it all the time. We loved going there on tank tours to see his tank, because he had one colony that looked like a pear. He had another one that looked like an apple. He had another one that looked like a pancake. He had another one, they all had their own shape. And they all looked 100% healthy. And I just couldn't believe what a great reef keeper he was. And, I asked him, how do you do this? And his wife says he works on the tank every night for 2 hours. And I thought, 2 hours every single night? I wouldn't even know what to do for 2 hours. You clean some equipment and you clean the glass, and what's left to do if nothing's killing each other, right? But he was tending to it in a way that I've never considered. And, he was on top of his water quality, and he had, a beautiful variety of fish, and, man, just gorgeous. And, not long after we visited this tank, he ends up opening a fish store, and he puts a beautiful reef tank where you first walk in is the first thing you see, and of course we're all drooling over these corals that he grows into these beautiful shapes. And that is part of growing the perfect reef and making it look as natural as possible. Now, I'll tell you something else that many of you might not consider. You go and you collect all these different corals. You go to the fish store, you go to a buddy's house, and you're like, oh my god, I don't have that one, I need that. And they give you this frag, and you dip it and quarantine it, or at the very least you dip it, because you don't want to put any kind of pests in your tank. And then you stick it in your tank, and you stand back and you look at your reef tank, and it's dotted with all these different corals. Jump back to the screen here for a second. I'm sure you're tired of looking at that. And you have, 40, 50, 60 frags growing in your tank. And it's beautiful, but they're all little tiny gems. And when you look at all of those different corals, and you're thinking, oh my god, my reef's going to be amazing one day, when I look at that exact same tank, I don't see the same. And I'll tell you why. Because certain corals are going to grow faster, and they're going to dominate the tank. And so if you have 60 different frags in your tank right now, in 3 years you'll have 12 colonies, and all the rest are gone. You know, you can move things around, you can try to save stuff, and I'm not saying don't do it, but keep in mind things are always changing in a reef tank. Some things are going to die naturally, some things are going to be stung by their neighbor, some things are going to die because you made a mistake. But you can't have 60 corals growing in your tank. It's just not going to work out. You know, Joe Ayulo's beautiful 20,000 gallon reef tank that someone mentioned earlier on in this chat, he's got a lot of different species in there, but he also has a lot of the same species. And if you start looking really close at his tank, you'll see there's a whole bunch of turbinaria right here, and it kind of goes for feet and feet and feet. And he's got a whole bunch of the milka coral, and he actually planted like 60 frags of that coral in an area so that it would completely fill that area just massively in this giant 2 and 3 foot area. And then he has a huge acro growing up, and he's got a whole bunch of that gorgonian that's on the right side of my reef that you guys like, the one that's moving and is brown. He's got tons of that, and it fills in a lot of blank spaces, so that way you end up with a really pretty tank. And that's part of the reality. It's not, well, if my tank was bigger, I could have more corals. You're still going to have dominating corals that are going to take up the space. So, I would recommend buy the corals you love the most. Don't buy the ones that you're kind of iffy on because you don't need them, because they're going to take up real estate that you want in your reef tank. And I'd also recommend that you focus on exactly what you're trying to attain. I saw a beautiful tank many years ago. It was a tank of the month. And back then I didn't know very much. And I was looking at it, I was like, what am I looking at? And I asked the guy, you know, they had a build thread talking about his tank. And I said, what is this colorful thing on the bottom that covers the sand? You couldn't see any sand, you couldn't see any rock. It was just these colors that just bubbled all the way across. And it was just wall-to-wall Rickordia. And Rickordia is in the mushroom family, and they're beautiful, and they come in lots of different colors. And if you're really good at keeping them, you can have a plethora of them like he did. And like I said, his tank was wall-to-wall. And it was a very simple tank. It wasn't complicated like Dwayne's. And it didn't need a lot of different additives because it was focusing on the softies like zoanthids and Rickordia. I'm not even sure what else was in there. But yes, Dave's Nano Tank says, the cheaper the coral, the more they grow like weeds. And that's pretty true. I can't argue with you there. Those corals that we put in our tank as a newbie end up growing really quickly, filling in some area, and then they seem to keep growing and they take over. There's a guy, I came across his picture on Facebook about a year ago, and he had a whole bunch of green star polyps covering the back of his tank. So instead of it being scraped clean like I recommend, it was green fur, and this coral was just doing this all the time. And that was kind of neat, but what caught my eye wasn't that he had a lot of green star polyps, but his mag float, the cleaning magnet, was completely covered. So when you put it on the end of the tank and you were looking at the tank from the front, you saw the reef, you saw the green star polyps in the background, and you saw the power head, and you saw this rectangular brick of green star polyps. That when he cleans the tank, he's cleaning the tank with green star polyps. It was pretty hilarious. But he hid the magnet. You couldn't even see it. So when it was parked, it kind of looked like part of the tank. And I thought that was kind of brilliant. And then another guy, he took some Favia coral, which is in the Elpias family, and he sliced it very thin on one of those bandsaws, and then he glued it onto the lock line return nozzle. And it took a long time to cover, but it encased the lock line completely to where all you saw was coral with water shooting out. That was pretty awesome too. So there are times where you can help hide things using special thought, or you can check and see what's available on the market. Tunzi had a rock that was designed specifically to hold their Tunzi Turbell pump. And the pump would fit through the hole, water would flow out, but the whole power head was hidden in the rock, which I think is great. But the problem with that rock, for me, was you have to lift the rock out to get the pump out to clean it occasionally, and then you got to put it back. And if that coral is if that rock is covered with coral like a porcupine, it's going to be really hard to get into that rock. Now, you could put the rock near the top, and you could put acans and zoanthids and things on there. That would work. But it just seemed like a challenge. I actually have one of those rocks. A friend of mine wanted it, but then she never got it, so it's still here. All right, let me see if I can answer any more questions. Ask me a question. Ask me any question. Let me take a drink. We are in the final 2 minutes, by the way. I want to wrap these up at 45 minutes. I don't want to go too long. Okay, Econ2 asked a great topic, and that's going to be a future video. It may not even be a live stream. It might be an actual video, because it talks about ideal water conditions for corals. And I feel like that's a huge topic. Alright, this one I can answer now. Beach Road Bum asks, let's talk about the amount of live rock needed. And live rock, to me, is live rock. Not the dry rock, not the dead rock that you get and you put in your tank and you wait 9 months to 12 months for it to really kick in and be mature. But I mean live rock. You go to the store, you go to the fish store and you say, I want a box of live rock. Or you go through their vats and you pull out your favorite rocks and you bring them home. You can put those rocks in your reef, and the beneficial bacteria that's all over that rock will help with the natural filtration of your reef. And that's why I set up all my tanks with live rock. And, you know, ironically, when I set up my little frag tank many years ago, I used only some dry rock. And, you know, it was neat, but I went through so many algae phases. And you've heard me recently complaining about my 60-gallon frag system. I used all dry rock on that one too, and it's driving me nuts. The tank is just ugh. So that's why you're not seeing any pictures of it, because I kind of hate that tank. I'm going to have to buy myself a sea hare or two just to help get it back on track. The puffer still has not been picked up, so I'm feeding him, he's polluting the water's going to crap, and the tank just looks like garbage. How long can you keep salt water circulating in your trash cans? I would use it for as long as 3 months, because that's what I do. But I keep my container full of salt water circulating 24 hours a day, and I keep it sealed. Mine has a screw-on lid, so it's really sealed. But if you put a trash can lid on top of yours, you could invert it, so that way it's a dome this way, and condensation will just drip right back down. You can keep your salt water in circulation, and you can use salt water as you need. If you feel like that's too long, or you don't want to look at a trash can that long, you can make a smaller amount of water. If you're running a quarantine tank, and you know you're changing water every day, try to make enough water that'll last you a week for daily water changes. Like, let's say you're changing 3 gallons a day, you need 21 gallons of salt water handy, so that way you could change it each day, and it would always be the same salinity. Okay, I'm going to stop here, guys, because I feel like my voice is just going. I thank you for all your comments and for being willing to listen, and I'm going to do another live stream next week. Maybe we'll do that one about the water quality necessary for corals. But feel free, when this video uploads to YouTube, to reply in the comments what you would like me to talk about. Reply to this conversation and tell me what you liked best, what you didn't. If you're not a subscriber to this video yet, to this channel, please do subscribe. I'm trying to build this audience, of course, and share the knowledge with everyone. You're always able to share these videos with other people if you think it would help them. Thanks so much for all your time and for tuning in and for being part of this. And MACNA is just about 2 weeks from now, so if you're still on the fence, you didn't win, I want you to just sit there and say, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to go. I'm going to trust Mark, because Mark would never mislead me, and I'm not. You're going to have a great time. It's totally worth it. Even if you just go for 1 day, go for 1 day. Make it a day trip. Drive down. If it's 2-3 hours away because you're kind of close, great. If you're further, I don't know what to tell you. Just do it. You will have a great time. And that's it. Thanks so much for watching. Now I gotta figure out how to stop this thing. Bye!